Okay, so today we're picking up where we left off. We talked a brief history lesson. We talked about right triangles initially, sine, cosine, tangent, everything's peachy keen. And yesterday we talked about, well, what if it's not a right triangle? What if we just have any plain old triangle? And we said that law of sines would work. However, law of sines, if you recall, only works if you have an angle and the side opposite it. So law of cosines kicks in when you don't have that relationship. And by the time we get done with law of cosines, we'll be able to solve any triangle, regardless of whether it's a right triangle or a 45, 45, 90, or if you have the ratio of a side and an angle opposite. Okay. So for instance, if we have something like a clicker that works, or that triangle. And we'll come back to that triangle in a second. Notice that we don't have side A, so therefore we don't have the angle and the side opposite it. So before we dive into law of cosine, let's review a little bit. What can you tell me about the length of side A?
You say SML.
Good. What about it? I like that. So you mentioned the SML theorem. However, do we know how big angle B or C is? No. So we don't necessarily know which side is largest. You can look at the picture, and according to the picture, it appears that AB is the longest side, but we don't know that for a fact. Don't trust pictures. What else do we know about A? Without using the SML theorem, because like I said, it doesn't apply. Can A be 13? Are you sure? Can A be 140? For the most part, then, we're in agreement that A can't be 140. It'd just be too bloody long, right? But I could sell you on A being 13?
No.
No? Why not? Can A be 1? No? Why not? Because what? What do you mean too short? How do you know it's too short? So you're thinking graphically. You just have that little one thing flopping in the breeze and wouldn't reach up to the 4. But 13 would be okay? Okay. Any other input? Well, the answer is yes. A cannot be 1. However, A cannot be 13 either, for the exact same reason you described. If A was 13, the 4 and the 7 would never catch. We talked about this before. We called it the triangle inequality theorem. You probably forgot about it. That's why I wanted to refresh it. What was the rule?
The two sides that you know have to add up to equal to or
Longer than.
then the side.
Right. Everybody hear that? Yeah, the two shortest sides have to add up to be greater than the third side. So if A was 1, that wouldn't work because 1 plus 4 is 5, not greater than 7. If A is 13, that doesn't work because 7 plus 4 is 11, which is not greater than 13. Okay, so that begs the question, how big can A be? TJ?
11 or 3.
Exactly 11 or 3? Can A be 8?
No.
Why?
Because 4 and 11, or 4 and 7 don't allow it.
Why?
Add up to 11.
Okay, well, what's the rule? Is 11 greater than 8?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, in case you didn't know, 11 is greater than 8.
The other way around.
Yeah, it happens sometimes. The alligator eats a bigger number, remember, you got less than. Okay. So TJ, back to you. Can A be 8?
Yes.
So let's suppose it is 8. Which are the two short sides? The 8 and the 4, the 4 and the 7, or the 7 and the 8?
The 4 and 7.
7 plus 4 is?
11.
Is 11 greater than 8?
Yes.
Yes, I understand. You're working under pressure, it happens. Okay. So you mentioned 3 and 11.
Yes. No, no, no.
Talk a little bit about that. Could A be 3? Let's do that.
No.
Anybody?
No,
Why not?
because it has to add up with 4 because those are the two shortest sides.
Okay.
4 equals 7, but it has to be longer than 7.
Could A be 4?
Yes.
Because 4 plus 4 is 8, which is greater than 7. Okay. Could A be 3.00000001?
Yes.
Good. So the smallest value that we can have for A is it's got to be a little bit bigger than 3. What's the biggest value A can be? Go ahead.
11, no, 10 point something or other.
I'm a little iffy on the something or another part.
Like 10.9 at most, I guess.
Mathematically, how would you say that?
10.99999.
That's not.
I guess.
Well, could you throw another 9 on the end of that?
Yes.
And then another 9? So how do you say that mathematically?
Computing.
10.9 repeating.
No, that's cheating.
No? Okay.
It's not cheating, it's using resources.
I understand.
It's has to be less than 11.
There you go. After all that discussion, what do you know about A? Less than 11, but greater than 3. Okay? And that's going to work in all these triangles. And you can use that when you get done with your answer, because what's going to happen when we solve this first problem is some of you are going to get an answer that's not going to make any sense. Then we got to figure out what you did wrong. Okay? So let's do it. Unlike the law of sines, we're not going to derive the law of cosines. I'm just going to give it to you. You're going to write it down, and then you're going to learn it through practice. So there's the law of cosines. This one's quite a bit nastier than the law of sines. And I'm going to talk while you're writing. It doesn't mean that we can only use the law of cosines on triangles that are labeled A, B, and C. What it does mean is that if you have a triangle labeled A, B, and C, you would fill it in this way. Later on, we'll have a triangle labeled DOG. You're going to have to figure out how things go in. The thing to notice is that the value or the letter on the far left side of the equal sign matches the letter on the far right-hand side. So if you've got angle F all the way to the right, then you've got to have little f squared on the left. And then you fill in all the other letters. All right, here we go. Let's try this. This is called the side angle side scenario. Like law of sines, there's only 2 cases we have to worry about here. The first is called the side angle side scenario. Set up that equation using the law of cosines, and then solve for A. This will be fun. This is the easy one, by the way. If you set it up carefully, you can do the whole thing in your calculator in one shot. Just done. Remember what we talked about with A. Anybody get 30.5?
I did not.
Yeah, for A
Uh-oh.
squared. For A squared.
I got it.
Yeah.
What's that, Wendy?
That
Oh, I
that
got
was for A
30.5.
squared.
30.5?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
But it can't be 30.5.
I
Yeah,
got
I know, but
5.5.
then you have to do this for a room.
Nice, you gotta do the
Yeah,
square root of
What
that.
she said.
Yeah.
5.5.
I did it wrong the first time and I got 2.3.
No, that's wrong.
5.5.
It's
Okay, so there it is set up, and this is the scenario. This is a scenario that you can type that on.
and then it adds with people base.
That's not how you learn.
Or no, oh, it's supposed to be minus. It's part of 0, a squared, and
But the thing is, A squared
minus 34.5.
Just look like 2 times A is an 8 by 7.
And then you get these two is 30
Now, by the quiz next year.
and then you do the
Oh,
square.
yeah, let's get.
I still find out. There it is.
My mom,
What are you supposed to do? I didn't plug it into my calculator.
yeah, so we went to Target, there's colors, and we got
Okay, so are we done now?
no, please.
Okay, I'll wait then, go ahead.
Let me say something back.
I like landscape. And they want me to do it.
What do you do with that?
Oh, good.
Yeah.
28 times 2 would also be 56.
Not white.
Oh my gosh, our mom had to go last night, and they drove so much money. So then they bought these for
What?
So now that's awesome. So I had. I thought that we were just bought formula. I was like, oh, that's funny.
Then you chose no, no.
Because you can't do it. So it's that's too hard.
You're talking about it in
Yes.
geo and stuff.
This word one goes. It would be.
Yeah, you like do a little like 5 minutes and stuff. So.
You guys do know I'm waiting, right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Even.
Okay, that makes sense. Like it gives us like 2 minutes. Oh, I did it right. Wait, this
First, I'm gonna know you. Have you had it looked at?
Thank
Are you not able to wrestle or do they wrestle?
I'm fully.
Maybe it's great too, like.
What do you need a thumb for? What do you need a thumb for other than an eye gouge?
This would be the way to do it in one go.
He's got fingers of steel, he just goes in there like a latches on.
I got to be like anything.
You make prosthetic thumbs.
Wrong second. I feel like it's
You're done. Beautiful. So, this is a scenario that you can type the whole thing into the calculator at once. The thing to remember, however, which this group didn't have as big a problem as the last group, is to remember that a squared is 30.5, but you have to end by taking the square root. Any problems? Okay. Now, the nice thing about law of cosines is you only have to do it once. It's a more difficult calculation, but you only have to do it once. So let's suppose in this problem I then said, how big is angle C? That's the point when you switch to law of sines, because law of sines is a much easier calculation to do. We'll get to that in the next example. So the next example is the second scenario, which is called the side-side-side scenario. We know none of the angles. Adrian, which angle is biggest?
19.78.
No, that's a side.
Oh,
O is an octopus, right?
yes.
Which angle is the middle angle?
Angle G.
As in gopher.
Yes.
And then that would make angle D as in dog the smallest.
Yeah.
Okay, now that's really important because if you do this wrong, you'll get incorrect answers. That seems like a silly statement, but I'll explain. It's pretty hard to screw that up. This, however, you can screw it up by missing one important fact. There is a weird situation that happens with law of cosines that we're not going to deal with. That's not for us to worry about. That comes up in like pre-calc. It's called the ambiguous case of the law of sines. It even sounds scary. We're going to avoid having to deal with that issue by remembering one simple thing. When you're solving a side scenario, always do the largest angle first. And then go in descending order. So we're going to solve for angle O first, then angle G, then angle D. And that'll guarantee that you get the correct answers. If you don't follow that process, you will get answers that appear to be correct, but when you add up all your angles, all of a sudden you've got a triangle with 193 degrees. And we know that that can't happen. Okay, so let's start by solving for angle O. Set up your equation. Once you get it set up, if you're feeling saucy, try solving it. You might need some help with that. See, senorita.
You said not to base it by like the photo, so like will they give you the biggest angle?
Hold on a second. Adrian, back to you. How did you know that O was the biggest angle?
Because 19.7 is the biggest number.
He did not base it off the picture. I can't stress enough. Do not trust the picture. You will see times when I will give you 7 different triangles to solve, and they'll all look like the exact same triangle. They may even look like right triangles, just to get all tricky on you. Okay, so set it up, see if you can solve for O. No, it's not going to be fun at all.
Wait, is this? But I get it. I know.
No, always. No.
See what happens. Worst that can happen is you're wrong and minus points and laughs at you. You can hit her with your back eye. You can put
We have all the sides. We have all the sides. Oh, no, okay. Oh, no, you're like.
So you put A as the O.
The middle one. So
Wait, but what's A? What's O? Oh, okay. I think I get this. Oh, yeah, this is like.
Okay, stop what you're doing. Look up. Stop what you're doing, look up, and make sure you have it set up correctly. I'd hate to see you proceed to try to solve it. Notice that because angle O is over on the right-hand side, we need 19.7 on the left-hand side. Carry on.
There's something wrong. No, there's not. I figured it out. Okay.
here on.
Wait. That's what.
Young
I'm confused what to do next. No, because you can't decimals in it.
I don't like putting it all over the tool and get out.
Okay, did you get? Yeah, I wrote that. It was minus
try something.
Is that right? I just literally just
I don't know what 19.7 squared is. How would I know that? I'm not a freak. Good.
I wrote out a thing, so that
You wrote out a thing.
I know that totals, I plugged everything into the.
Good. So you
Oh,
got
I
that.
think I got it.
Oh,
I tried, but it's.
no, that's not what
Then
I
you
said.
subtract this, then move this over there, then do the inverse.
No, wait.
This is.
Subtract these two.
So I subtracted
And
these
once you
two.
get that, to get move it over, subtract that.
Bang, dude, I know how to do
And
this,
then
I'm
do
so
the
smart.
cosine.
Oh my god.
So close.
Wait a minute.
Your Aunt Sally would not allow that.
I would pat you on the neck.
Then I'll move this over.
Ooh, maybe. That's a big round. Keep it a little cleaner there, sister.
What? Which one?
Keep it as at least 2 decimal places when you're doing the calculation.
Okay.
Not do, I mean, if it's like some kind of decimal.
It didn't work.
Mr. Reed, hello.
I already did that.
I'm not always right.
This is.
How am I doing it wrong?
Yeah, then just do the. Wait,
Oh my god, it would be like. I'm just gonna restart and try to.
Looks okay so far. Now what?
I mean,
That's part of that.
You just divide that.
That, you pointed out the data. That's all.
Divide by.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, but then
We're good.
divided that, you don't have to divide that. Yeah, you divide with negative, all the.
No, you get a negative.
That would also be. Yep. But it would just be O.
Okay, stop what you're doing. Now we have an algebra lesson. So I thought this might be the problem. The difficulty for most of you is not the geometry, it's the simple algebra. Okay, so let me ask you a question. If I gave you that as an equation, could you solve it? You sure? What would you do?
Subtract 5.
Subtract 5 and then?
Divide by -2.
Okay, beautiful. So, if I said to you, could you solve that? What would you do?
Subtract by 243.8.
Say again, Mom?
subtract 246.81 and then divide by negative 126.5.
Perfect. How is that any different to what you're doing? Except that there's a cosine of O in there. Okay, try that now, see what you get.
Oh my
I got 140.5.
Ooh! Listen to you, Mr. Fancy Pansies.
I would take a drink, but
On your divide.
actually, yes. Yes, that's what I get.
I can do it.
Take a minus sign with you.
Wait. Don't say yeah.
Do the thumbs up.
I got 140.46. I forgot that.
Okay, so what's not right? What do we solve? Is that the answer? It's a cosine. We went over, right? How do you get rid of cosine?
Yes.
Okay, so what'd you get? What's wrong with that?
a day in an afternoon. That would be amazing.
Air,
And then that would stop.
But not like,
People will start.
it looks like
and then they
Why
will.
do you
Because I'm just the photo.
Well, if you got an answer like 247 degrees, that would be an indication that, or if you got an answer like 3 degrees.
And then they ask me, why? I'm not.
You said you just said the whole answer right now.
It's like learning how to fly.
No, maybe I'm not trying this.
And then they start to fly. They
This
start
is
to
like after
fly.
I could put 1.8 for that one.
So, he.
So here, I'll show you how to do that.
I didn't start from
Oh, okay.
Okay, so, if you've done your algebra correctly, you should find that the cosine of angle O is negative 0.7712. Okay. Now, I saw a lot of you start plugging and chugging right away, meaning 19.7 squared, 12.1 squared, 8.8 squared, and multiplied a whole bunch of stuff out. That's fine. You can also solve it without multiplying anything into your calculator. Doesn't matter, whatever works best for you. Now, here's the thing that will prove helpful. Let's suppose you solve that and you get the cosine of O is equal to 6.5. Hopefully by now you realize you're supposed to do an inverse cosine, correct? Yes. All right, do an inverse cosine of 6.5. Tell me what you get. On your calculator, do an inverse cosine of 6.5 and tell me what you get.
Error.
Error. Correct. Error.
You get
That works also. If you've done your math correctly, with sine and cosine, you can only take an inverse of a number between -1 and 1. So if you get a number bigger than 1 or smaller than -1 and you try to do an inverse cosine or inverse sine on it, you'll get an error. Which can be fairly frustrating. You do all the work and all of a sudden you have the cosine of 0 equals 6, or of O equals 6.5. You do an inverse cosine and you get an error. You screwed up somewhere, you have to go back and find it. But hopefully, most of you recognize that when you get the cosine of -0.7712, you do an inverse cosine and you get 140.5. Now, hold on. Take the inverse cosine of 0.7712 without the minus sign. What do you get for an answer?
You get like 39.
You get the wrong answer. So minus signs become very important. And in fact, how much do you get there, Molly? 39.5?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the relationship between 39.5 and 140.5?
Just say 39.
They add up to 180. So if you miss the minus sign, you'll actually get the supplement of the angle you're looking. Okay, this problem is going to cause some issues for people that are weak in algebra. There's our answer. Now, which angle did you say we're doing next?
We're gonna do.
Good. You could do this whole calculation over again and solve for angle G. However, and it wouldn't be wrong, but it's going to be a lot of work. Whereas I can just go back to law of sines and do something simple like that. Ideally, you're only going to do the law of cosines once. Then you switch to law of sines, and then where'd the D angle come from? How did I figure out D so quickly with no calculations? Yeah, just do a 180 business there. I know that G is 23, I know that O is 140.5, 140.5 plus 23 from 180 gives me 16.5. And also notice there that I've got the sine of G is 0.3907, which is a number between -1 and 1, and therefore I'm good to go.
Do we never just like use the exact answer for these, or do we round up to?
I'm rounding to demonstrate how I did the calculations. On your calculator, you should be using the exact values. And you can do that by either storing numbers or scrolling up to get that number and bring it back down. Okay, problems? Awesome. Okay, so day 11 for tonight. Now, wait, hold on, before I cut you loose, let's talk about the rest of the week then. Tomorrow, we're gonna see problems that involve law of sines and law of cosines without explicitly telling you where to start. So for instance, this problem, you knew right away, I have to do law of cosines first because it's a side-side-side scenario. Tomorrow's homework, you're gonna have to figure that out. And then we're gonna complicate it by looking at some real-world examples where finding the triangle is gonna be half the challenge. On Thursday, we're gonna talk a little bit about what's called radians and converting from radians to degrees. And then Friday is our quiz over all of this stuff. Okay? Good. While you're working, I'll put that up there to see how many of those you can figure out.
That's that bad.
Say again?
I'm sorry.
You shouldn't.
Dad, I want a shield. Guys, I know. I see a bomb. That's the door. Yeah. We're still in chapter 5. I
see the crowbar.
Wait, what's the most
Chainsaw. Oh, that's
Wait. I never I don't even know. You were the
I will not destroy my room.
None of those stats are true.
Yes, we are.
That's it.
Oh my god, is this like it's from like
I think I recorded the lesson yesterday.
This is like Tetris. Not looking at me.
That's the infinity gauntlet. That's the last one.
I knew that one.
That's bad.
Juliana, I have it, I'll post it. I haven't posted it yet, I'll get on it right now.
Wait, are you not?
Yes, sir.
Whenever we don't know the angles, how do we know what AB is?
You can label however you like. So it doesn't have to be ABC, you can use your own initials, you can call it John, gas, whatever you want. Because you have to use the side. So notice that O's over here, there's no side all the way up. So if I'm looking at triangle LMN and I'm solving triangle L, then I've got to use side L, so there are.
That's Legend of Zelda.
Yeah, I got that one.
But that was just.
Oh, that one? The fence.
Dude, I'm
Batman's better. What's that stick? It's like 5 stick.
Okay.
Between the pedal and the gas pump.
Actually, I wanna go to work.
Right, I'm going to have some
Like the robot? Like,
Oh, travel alone.
No.
oh, no.
Next to the gas.
Right in between the two,
The brown.
not the brown thing.
Next to the brown. Not you.
I didn't say
Next to the brown. And then,
What day? Wait,
Oh, we don't need, well, like, okay, so, yeah, you need the inverse, it's like the number two.